Chapter 369. The Demon King of Fury 3. That silvery light, Iris knew exactly what the source of that light was. The Moonlight Sword, Iris whispered, shocked. The sword whose name had been erased from history. The Moonlight Sword was a nightmare that made the demon folk who had barely managed to survive that era of war afraid to even recall it, so its name had become a taboo that no one dared to mention. For Iris in particular, the Moonlight Sword had felt like an even more terrifying nightmare. This was because every time its silvery light flashed, a person she had held dear to her had disappeared. Kamash, Sane, and even her father. The moment that she registered this sorrowful light, Iris' emotions chilled to a frightening extent. A sword slash that was executed within a split second shot out a ray of moonlight that managed to reach all the way to the skin of Iris' throat. But as a demon king, such a short span of time seemed to stretch as long as eternity, allowing Iris to leisurely take her time in deciding what to do about it. Without any fear, Iris stretched her hand forward. A demon king was able to turn the world around them into their devildom just by existing. It didn't matter how strong Iris had been before she became a demon king. The moment she was reborn as a demon king, her existence was bestowed with the power and status that a demon king deserved. The ray of moonlight was blocked. Darkness coiled around the moonlight and tore it into pieces. Eugene's slash didn't manage to inflict even a single scratch on Iris. This wasn't a surprise. Even at its best, the Moonlight Sword wouldn't have had an absolute advantage against a demon king's dark power. The same went for the Holy Sword. So it was only natural for the current Moonlight Sword, which wasn't even in a complete state, to be blocked by the demon king. Eugene's attack had been blocked. He hadn't managed to inflict a single scratch. He had failed to gain the upper hand. But it wasn't totally pointless. At the moment of contact with the ray of moonlight, a piece of Iris' dark power had dissipated. Any battle against a demon king would be a hellishly difficult one. Even if they were sliced, ripped, or smashed into pieces, a demon king would still manage to survive. In order to kill them, one needed to be patient, persistent, and keep up their attacks without making a single mistake. The demon king's almost infinite amount of dark power needed to be slowly whittled away. They needed to be killed over and over again by slicing and smashing apart their head, limbs, and heart until they could no longer revive. At least that's how we did it in the past, Eugene recalled. It would be insane for him to use ignition when his fight against the Demon King had just started. Although ignition granted him an explosive burst of power, there were clear limits to its sustainability. The longest he would be able to extend it was a mere 10 minutes. His body wouldn't be able to hold on any longer. For a battle with a Demon King, who could revive herself even after dying, it would be impossible to finish the fight within 10 minutes. The moment to use ignition would come when Eugene was sure he could slay the Demon King, when Iris' dark power had been consumed as much as possible, and she had reached the limits of her ability to revive herself. So Eugene had specifically created Prominence to use during his fights against the Demon Kings. He had created the spell because of the absence of those he had once fought with, Vermouth and Molan. Because he wouldn't be able to use ignition right from the start, he had thought of replacing it with a signature to further maximize his firepower. Eugene's 7 stars resonated with his use of Prominence. The dark purple flames burned fiercely. The fluttering embers transformed into feathers that scattered in every direction. The information conveyed by Prominence's feathers gave Eugene a 6th sense of his surroundings. This was his first time using Prominence with a 7-star white flame formula. The mana output was incomparable to when he had only had 6 stars. Eugene was currently much stronger than he had ever imagined himself to be. He had gone far beyond his level in his previous life. If his opponent was still Iris, the Rakshasa princess of the past, the outcome of the battle would have already been decided. Unfortunately, Eugene's current opponent wasn't the Rakshasa princess but instead the newly ascended Demon King of Fury. Iris, the Demon King, stretched out her hand. The movement was by no means fast. It was at a very ordinary pace. But even though that was all there was to her movement, it didn't seem that way to Eugene. Because as a Demon King, Iris was able to manipulate and control her opponent's senses with even the slightest of movements. For Eugene, the whole world seemed to have been transformed into the Demon King's domain and was attacking him. Boom! As mana met with dark power, flames and darkness collided. Eugene barely managed to retain hold of his consciousness. The shockwaves had sent his body flying. However, before Eugene could halt himself, a soft and comforting light wrapped around his back. It was a miracle. On the figurehead of the Laversia, Christina was stretching her left hand forward. Behind Christina, dozens of priests were kneeling together in prayer. At the same time, the paladins contributed their own divine power to the priests' prayers even as they defended against the attacks of the Dark Elves. So, the minor internal injuries caused by the clash were completely healed before Eugene had even felt any pain from them. The miracle didn't stop there. Vitality spread throughout his body, all his physical abilities were improvised, his head became clearer and his senses were sharpened. "I've missed this," Eugene thought as his lips unconsciously arced up into a smile. The reason Hamel had been able to fight so fiercely 300 years ago was all thanks to Anissa's miracles and blessings. A flash of light pierced through the darkness. The Demon King's eyes snapped towards that oncoming flash of light. Waves of pitch-black darkness rose to try and sweep it away. However, even under the impact of dark power, the approaching object couldn't be erased. Soon Sienna was standing next to Eugene. A storm of mana so thick that it could be seen with the naked eye was raging around her. The Demon King giggled and said with a smile, "How nice to see you again." Boom. The pitch-black dark power once again formed into waves. These waves of dark power crashed down on Eugene and Sienna from all directions. Even at this moment, Eugene and Sienna didn't have any concerns for each other's well-being. They both trusted Anisse to provide them support from the rear. Eugene believed that Sienna would be able to handle this, and Sienna also believed the same of Eugene. Inside Eugene's cloak, Rhaenyra closed her eyes and resonated with Eugene. Even if she was a hatchling, a dragon was still a dragon. Her uniquely strong and dense mana amplified Eugene's flames. At the same time, an intuitive display appeared in front of Eugene's eyes. Mare was transmitting the information obtained from prominence onto this screen. Eugene followed the path that the display revealed to him. Hopping from space to space, Eugene kept dodging. Sienna also made repeated use of blink as she readied her own spell. Wild artillery fire from the ships suddenly cut through the darkness. Meanwhile, the light of the holy sword flared and dimmed multiple times as Eugene's mana combined with the sword's divine power. A spatial distortion flowed along the holy sword's edge as 4 layers of the empty sword were created using Eugene's 7-star white flame formula. The ray of light that sprang from Eugene's empty sword definitely didn't seem like something that could have come from the holy sword. It was a black light so deep that it looked like it had cut through the world and seemed like it would suck out your soul. With only a single swing of his sword, Eugene managed to erase even more of the Demon King's dark power. Iris' eyes shone as the ability of her demon eye was demonstrated once more. A well of abyssal darkness bloomed in front of the Demon King, only for it to be split apart. Before Eugene's slash had even touched it, the moment that Iris had demonstrated her ability, Sienna had also revealed the spell she had been preparing. Iris was one of Sienna's most hated enemies from 300 years ago until now. Right from the start of her days spent researching magic in Arath, Sienna had been preparing to slay her enemies. So Sienna had also prepared a counter to the Demon Eye of Darkness. The darkness created by Iris' ability wasn't really darkness. It wasn't really mana or dark power either. That sticky dark matter could be connected to other patches of itself and be used as a portal, or it could be used as a simple massive force. While it was impossible to identify the true nature of this dark matter from external observations, the truth could be seen by having direct contact with it. Or at least that had been the case 300 years ago. The current Sienna could see right through the demon eye without even touching it and was able to create a new magical substance within the mass of dark matter that nullified it. Crackergow. The empty sword dove through the opening. The firepower of the empty sword could destroy any and all dark power that tried to block it. Finally, the blade arrived at the Demon King's body. It didn't just slice through her, but the slash literally erased the Demon King's body the very moment that it landed. Not a single piece of Iris was left behind. The moment he had sent a slash with the empty sword, Eugene had also swung the moonlight sword he was holding in his other hand. As the Demon King disappeared, boom! A huge explosion was heard almost simultaneously with her disappearance. Sienna was close to the explosion and was caught in it before falling into the sea. Although she was protected by a magical barrier, the shockwave still caused a little blood to flow out from the gap between Sienna's lips. Ahaha! The sound of laughter spread across the blackened skies. Crack. Dark power rained down from the sky like lightning. Eugene swung both the holy sword and the moonlight sword, slicing apart the dark power crashing down on him. This had created an opening in Eugene's defenses, and a hand suddenly shot towards him, seizing the opportunity. The approaching hand didn't manage to touch Eugene directly, but the dark power that surged forward along with the hand sent Eugene flying. In the darkness, there was a sound of angels chanting hymns. But the sound was so faint that one wouldn't be able to hear it if one didn't concentrate on doing so. The Demon King's dark power had suppressed the power of Krasitna's miracle. The Demon King, who had just appeared to have been erased, reappeared without a single wound on her. She laughed maniacally as she threw her hands up into the air. "How weak!" the Demon King cried out as her hands seemed to grab onto the sky. Her clutching fingers took hold of the very fabric of the sky and twisted. Crack. Following the movements of the Demon King's hands, the sky itself was also twisted. Eugene was sent flying by the massive shockwave created by Iris' actions. "How weak! You really are too weak," the Demon King shouted loudly, exulting in her own sense of omnipotence. Right now she felt like she could really do anything. Even the endless skies could be held within her grasp. Even the wide open seas below her would split apart as long as she, the Demon King, ordered, "Split open." Even those who were trying to resist her seemed insignificant. The saint, the hero, the archwizard, that was all that there was to them. In front of her strength, even with all of that, weren't they still no better than insects? The Demon King cackled as she swung her hands once more. The seas that were still dyed a blood red surged according to the Demon King's will. The sea rose up and came crashing down on Sienna. The waters of the sea carried the scent of blood and bore the colors of bloody death, and all of this caused Sienna to feel disgusted. Sienna had hated the sea since long ago. For Sienna, who had grown up in the forest, the sea had always been a strange and unfamiliar thing. However, she still thought the sight of the sea sparkling beneath the sunlight was quite beautiful. But the seas of the Devildom did not sparkle in the sunlight. There was always a nauseating stench wafting from them, and they were as dark as the color of rotten blood. And whenever Sienna saw such crimson waters or smelled such a scent, scenes she would never be able to erase from her memories came to mind. Scenes of the forest burning, elves dying after being tortured, elves being burned alive, and Hamel who had died and disappeared as he turned to dust. "She's everything that I hate," Sienna muttered as she floated in the sea on her back. Fwoosh! Divine power flew over and pushed back the dark power surrounding Sienna. In the few moments created by Christina's assistance, Sienna successfully managed to cast a spell. Tiny lights began to appear surrounding her. In this Devildom where the sun would not shine, hundreds and thousands of lights started sparkling in the lightless sea of blood. These countless lights rotated around Sienna before forming hundreds of layers of spinning circles behind her back. This sight looked like Sienna was lying down on a circle of stars. The churning of the sea came to a halt. The waves subsided. The entire sea fell still and silent. This was the Devildom ruled by a Demon King, but even something like a Demon King wouldn't be able to invade the space surrounding Sienna. "Isn't that right?" Sienna said as she glared up at the Demon King who was floating in the sky. Thanks to her dark power being so dense and dark, the Demon King was the only thing that could be seen in the skies above. Sienna tilted her head to the side and muttered, "Eugene." Light began to spread over the sea as if dawn was heralding the end of the night. Flying over from the distant location he had been thrown to, Eugene was bringing the light along with him. "That's right," Eugene said as his blood-stained lips twitched into a grin. "Aha aha." The Demon King's shoulders shook with laughter. Still lying on her back, Sienna aimed her staff up at Iris. Eugene's holy sword was once again layered with empty sword, and the moonlight sword was also giving off its ominous light. "Oh Lord," Christina murmured as she clutched her rosary in her stigmata-engraved hand. Sienna's stars raced upwards. The Demon King turned, and the world was twisted along with the movement of her clutching fingers. The trajectory of the racing stars was sent awry, but Sienna immediately corrected their course. Wherever the stars went, they left a dazzling afterglow behind. Eugene attacked Iris from the other side. The Demon King's eyes were watching Eugene, and dark matter rose to block his way forward. It was impossible for Eugene to counter that ability with his magic like Sienna had. However, he had the moonlight sword. Its light of destruction destroyed the dark matter. No matter how many times Iris Demoni's ability was shown, the Moonlight Sword still seemed to be able to erase it as easily as ever. But was it really done so easily? There was no way that it could be that easy. Eugene, Sienna, and Christina could all sense it. Their battles against the Demon Kings 300 years ago had never been easy. It had taken them several days just to defeat the weakest Demon King of Carnage. And the battle after that with the Demon King of Cruelty had brought them to the brink of death before they barely managed to win. As for the Demon King of Fury, that guy had been a special case even among the Demon Kings. Unlike the other Demon Kings, he had been obsessed with playing house with his adopted family. He had ended up giving his subordinates an excessive amount of his own power. Due to him lending out so much of his personal strength, the Demon King of Fury himself hadn't been as much of a threat as Carnage and Cruelty, who held lower ranks than he did. But what about the current Demon King of Fury? She had bestowed her strength to 103 Dark Elves. Just 103 individuals. Compared to Fury's army of 300 years ago, this number was so small that it could only be described with the word paltry. I'm sure of it, Eugene thought to himself. This new Demon King was just as strong as Carnage and Cruelty. By the time her name spread across the continent, she would have become even stronger. We need to kill her here in this sea, Eugene decided gravely. But was it really possible? Time had stopped, or at least it felt that way. The dark power spread all across the sea was gathering back in a single location. Although this young Demon King was impressed with her own omnipotence, it seemed that she wasn't arrogant. This Demon King also had her own reasons for wanting to win. In Iris' opinion, a uselessly large territory was unnecessary. What this Demon King currently needed was a territory that she could rule in safety. Although it might not be large, it would be a territory over which she had absolute control. That's right, the Demon King muttered as she nodded to herself. I just need to expand step by step. Even if it was just for her father's sake. Iris stretched out her hand, and her dark power moved. That was all that she did. Although there were only 2 steps to her attack, its power was terrifying. The Empty Sword and the Moonlight Sword both slashed out simultaneously. Eugene's intent was to offset the surge of dark power coming right at him. However, it wasn't enough. The recoil of the blow broke both of his arms. His internal organs were shattered. But the moment this happened, his body returned to full health. It was as if time had been turned back for him. Time hadn't actually gone back. It was just that as soon as Eugene had been injured, Christina's blessing had healed him. His arms, which had just recovered from being broken, thrust forward with the Holy Sword and the Moonlight Sword once more. As barbaric as ever, Anise muttered. Eugene sliced. Then he sliced again. He kept on slicing and slicing. That was how things went for the next few seconds. Eugene did get injured a few times, but fatal injuries were narrowly avoided. So the wounds were healed before he had even taken another breath. The Holy Sword suddenly seized up. A lump of dark power was weighing down the blade. Unable to forcefully swing the sword, Eugene let go of it for a few moments, and a different weapon was pulled out of an opening in his fluttering cloak. It was the demon spear Luentos, the weapon once used by the Demon King of Cruelty. The spear, which had been perfectly synchronized with Eugene, was sent piercing through space before Eugene had even needed to take up a javelin-throwing stance. The special ability of the demon spear, the Spear Forest, was unleashed right in front of the Demon King's eyes. Hundreds of spears that were engulfed in flames were launched at the Demon King. But none of them landed. Iris created a speck of darkness as tiny as a fingernail with the power of her demon eye. These small pieces of dark matter were able to twist each of the spear's trajectories so that they all missed. Iris sneered. You said my talent was still the same even though I've become a Demon King, didn't you? The Demon King's red eyes glared at Eugene. These are the strongest. Flang. These are the most valuable. Flang. These are the best. Flang. But can someone like you even understand that? Iris finished with a smile as she traced a hand under her eyes. Her pupils had slowly lowered with each blow that came crashing down on Eugene. The Demon King smiled as the hero fell into the Crimson Sea. Still smiling down at the hero who had fallen into the sea, the Demon King stretched her hand out to the demon spear that had come to a halt right in front of her. This was one of the Demon King's weapons that Vermouth had claimed. Perhaps because too much time had passed, not even the slightest bit of a Demon King's might had been left within this weapon. It's amazing, the Demon King said with a possessive lick of her lips as she grabbed hold of the demon's spear. But the moment she did so, the spear was covered with bulging veins and it began to writhe. The demon's spear and the blood and will of Eugene Lionheart that had been infused within it refused to surrender to the Demon King. Instead, as if it had been waiting for this opportunity, it bared its teeth and attempted to tear the Demon King's body into pieces. This time it was Eugene's turn to sneer. "Idiot," he chuckled. With a blood-soaked laugh, he raised his middle finger towards the Demon King. Chapter 370. The Demon King of Fury 4. "Sir Eugene, are you all right?" Christina's voice, riddled with concern, was heard inside Eugene's head. By now, Eugene was getting used to being worried about in this way. Right now, it wasn't just Christina doing so, but Mare and Rhaenyra inside his cloak were also crying out in concern as they clung to Eugene's sides, calling out Sir Eugene and benefactor respectively. It was true that his current state warranted such concern. Eugene had been struck down by the power of Iris Demon Eye repeatedly. Although he had only been hit by the explosions caused when dark matter was condensed to its limits, the attacks were both simple and effective, as the shockwaves practically ignored Eugene's defenses. But he hadn't died. Even though the attacks were so deadly that it wouldn't be strange if he were dead, Eugene was still alive. Even though all of the defenses protecting his body's exterior had been shattered, those weren't the only defenses Eugene had. The strong mana from the 7 stars of the White Flame formula had protected Eugene's body from the inside. The same went for the lightning flames that were dissolved into his blood. Right now, no, for a while now, Eugene had become something that could no longer be considered totally human. He had become an existence that wouldn't be so easy to kill even if he wanted to die. "She's definitely a Demon King," Eugene thought as he experienced Iris' new powers. Although his wounds were already healed, he still had the bitter taste of blood in his mouth. Eugene turned his head to the side and spit out the blood. "Hamel." Christina's voice had been replaced by Anis's. "Can you keep going?" Anis asked him a different question from the one that Christina had asked. That was because she knew that asking questions like, "Are you all right?" was of little use on such a battlefield. "If it's just for the rest of today," Eugene responded as he began standing back up. Anis knew that, whether it was Eugene or Hamel, he would always answer that question in the same way. This battle had come as a surprise. None of the people here had been prepared to fight against a Demon King. Even so, they still had to fight. Because they had to win this fight. They absolutely had to kill the Demon King here in this sea. Eugene looked around. "What about Sienna?" "You can just ask me that yourself." Sienna's grumbling voice was heard from the distance. When the Demon King had gathered up her dark power, the one who had suffered the most wasn't Eugene, who was being attacked directly, but Sienna. Dark power had a strength that was on a completely different scale to that of mana. So when the dark power came under the Demon King's complete control and flooded the area, Sienna, who had been making the mana in this area race around like stars, received the most damage when all of that mana was shunted aside. "There's no problem," Sienna's voice was heard coming from inside a writhing mass of dark matter. Although Eugene couldn't make out her appearance, her voice was still fresh. "Crackle, cracker, crackle." The lump of darkness cracked open as multicolored rays of light burst out of it. Sienna, who walked out with the burst of light, glared at the sky and spat out, "That damned bitch." The power of the demon spear had exploded directly into Iris' body. However, the Demon King wouldn't die from just that. Even now, the Demon King stood in the sky, looking perfectly fine and glaring down at them. Eugene waved his cloak at the falling demon's spear. Swish. Obeying his command, the demon's spear flew over and entered inside his cloak. At this sight, the Demon King couldn't help but let out a laugh. "You're radiating such unbecoming mana for a hero, and you're even able to perfectly control the weapon of a Demon King. Are you really sure you're the hero?" There was no need to give an answer to such a question. Eugene just raised the Holy Sword and the Moonlight Sword once more. In response, the Demon King narrowed her eyes. The sea was suddenly shaken by a massive explosion. The Black Sea was split apart as waves spread from the impact. The spray of water droplets was immediately swept away by flames and the burst of mana. Eugene leaped through space to reach the Demon King. His attack emerged at point-blank range. Although he was only swinging 2 swords, the slashes that erupted from his blades were too many to accurately count. Whenever the Holy Sword was swung, the black flames of the empty sword were entangled with the white of the divine power. And the pale moonlight that shone in the center of this chaos radiated a dangerous ominousness. Eugene's deadly azure rampage, an unceasing chain of slashes, split the Demon King's arms into hundreds and thousands of pieces, but no flesh or blood was scattered. Wherever the slashes swept past, the Demon King's arms had already regenerated in their tracks. Then a clenched fist filled with dark power pierced straight through Eugene's azure rampage. Flying. Eugene was pushed backward. Flying. But simultaneously the Demon King was struck by yet another attack. An attack that couldn't be seen, much less comprehended, managed to get through the dark power wrapped around Iris. A ray of magic designed solely to cause as much damage as possible pierced the Demon King. It didn't end with just that one ray of light. The light that managed to penetrate her body scattered into countless fragments that shot through everything in the Demon King's surroundings. Boom boom boom. Iris vanished in an explosion of dust. But the death of her physical body still didn't pose even the slightest threat to the Demon King in her current state. Even after experiencing physical death, her thought processes hadn't even paused. The Demon King's body was reborn once more. But as if they had been waiting for that, a circle of light appeared in the sky. Christina and Anise aimed together at the Demon King with their stigmata-engraved left hands. Earnest prayer was needed to perform a miracle, and the prayers from the two saintesses managed to catch hold of the Demon King. Whoosh! The Demon King's darkness pushed back against the dazzling light, but a line of light had been drawn across Iris' Devildom for now. For Eugene, that line became a path for him to run on. Eugene's killing intent was making it hard for him to think, but he clung to it as he glared at the Demon King. When they had fought the Demon King of Carnage, the Demon King of Cruelty, and the Demon King of Fury, and when they had fought the Demon King of Incarceration, just how many stars had Vermouth's white flame formula reached? Had his white flame formula already been perfected even back then? Eugene didn't believe that to be the case. Of course, Vermouth had been so strong from the beginning that he didn't seem human. That said, it wasn't like his strength had been in a perfect state right from the start. After all, perfection meant there was no more room for growth, and Vermouth had just kept getting stronger all the time. No matter how fast Hamel had tried to chase after him, the speed at which Vermouth grew stronger exceeded the pace at which Hamel could catch up. Vermouth had grown stronger with each battle that had taken place, even during their fights against the Demon Kings. During those, he had seemed to be growing stronger with each passing moment. So what about the current me? Eugene considered carefully. He had reached the 7th star of the White Flame formula. He had the Holy Sword and the Moonlight Sword. He also had the Demon Spear, the Annihilation Hammer, and many other weapons. He even had the experience from his past life. Considering all these facts, he couldn't be said to be worse off than Vermouth. In the first place, I need to be even stronger than Vermouth that I knew back then, Eugene reminded himself. He couldn't afford to be any weaker. Just being similar in strength wouldn't cut it either. Neither Vermouth nor Molen was here with them. If they wanted to kill the Demon King here and now, then it was only natural that Eugene had to be stronger than Vermouth from 300 years ago. Eugene or Hamel could still clearly remember what Vermouth had looked like back then, but there was no need to spend too much time trying to recall those memories. Because Hamel had known better than anyone else just how Vermouth had fought and how strong Vermouth had truly been. The person who had fought most closely by Vermouth's side was Hamel after all. Eugene muttered, "I will." Just like Eugene was radiating killing intent towards the Demon King, the Demon King was also showing her own killing intent towards Eugene. The killing intent of a Demon King was enough to make most of their opponents' bodies falter and drive their minds insane. "I will kill you," Eugene vowed through gritted teeth, killing intent laced into every word. Eugene's eyes were shining like a pair of flames. If it was true that earnest prayer really could cause a miracle, then what was happening inside Eugene now could also be called a miracle. Eugene's wholehearted desire was reflected in his killing intent towards the Demon King. What he had prayed for was for the light to allow him to surpass his own limits. He had reached the 7th star of the White Flame formula, and now all 7 of those stars inside his chest were shaking. Yet even though such changes were occurring inside of him, the mana flowing through Eugene's body didn't falter in the slightest. Instead, while flowing even more violently than before, his mana ignited a spark that would make all of Eugene's desires come true. The wings of prominence, which had been burning with a dark purple flame, suddenly set off an explosion. Just like when Eugene created layers of the empty sword, black spots appeared on the flames of his mana, and the outer wing feathers turned completely black. Boom. With the speed that Eugene showed next, it was as if he had become an exception to the rules everyone else took for granted. However, Eugene's will was as strong and focused as ever, and there was no way that anyone could miss his obvious intent to slay the Demon King. Arg. For the first time, it was a painful moan instead of a laugh that left the Demon King's lips. The Demon King hadn't died. However, it was even more painful than death for the Demon King. She had barely been touched by his attack, but it felt like her dark power was being dissolved, and scars were being etched across her very existence. Just what was that? Iris thought in fear. Iris had lived for over 300 years. She could still clearly recall all of the memories from that era of war, back when battles had been a daily affair. She had fought against all kinds of humans, the knights, wizards, and priests. Iris had even fought with the hero Vermouth. After the war ended, she also fought against the other demon folk, including the queen of the night demons, Norgiabella. This meant that Iris had fought against a demon folk who almost seemed to have more power than even a demon king. Even after becoming a demon king, Iris still felt that her odds of victory against Noir were slim. However, she had never felt anything like this in all of the previous battles that she had been in. This power was unique. It was different from any power shown by both the humans and the demon folk. However, Iris at least knew this much. This power really didn't seem to match well with words like the hero or the light. This power was much more violent, terrible, and ominous than all that such words could encompass. Ha. Ha ha ha. The Demon King burst into laughter even as her face twisted in agony and she kept coughing up black blood. Her glowing red eyes were fixed on Eugene, who was standing right in front of her. You call yourself the hero? How could there be a hero with a power of this nature? As the Demon King kept laughing insanely, she unleashed her own power. Darkness erupted in the gap between Eugene and the Demon King just as they both moved towards each other. Eugene wasn't swept back by the sudden eruption. Before he could be pushed back by the wave of darkness, the flames of prominence pierced through Iris' dark power and threw the Demon King down towards the sea. The Demon King was sent plummeting along with all of her dark power. The sea, which had been dyed black to look like an endless abyss, caught the falling Demon King. Hisses. The moment that Iris struck the water, a large portion of the sea evaporated, leaving a huge hole behind. The Demon King stood in the center of that hole and raised her hands. Sienna, Christina, and Anise, who had been surprised by Eugene's sudden transformation, quickly put their guards back up. What on earth was that? Sienna thought as she glanced up at Eugene, who was diving down towards the sea. She could understand why the Demon King had uttered such words. The wings of prominence that rode on Eugene's back were burning with pitch-black flames, and even the sparks of mana fluttering off of Eugene were now completely black. His appearance looked almost heretical. It was the complete opposite of Vermouth's sacred and noble flames that had burned a pure white. However, Sienna could still feel Hamel / Eugene in those flames. The one who was here now wasn't Vermouth Lionheart. This hero was the reincarnation of Hamel Dinah's, Eugene Lionheart. And 300 years ago, the man called Hamel couldn't have been further from the description of sacred or noble. That's why she felt that this sort of flame suited Eugene. Huh? A voice sighed inside Christina's head. As Christina looked at Eugene, Anise was also able to examine him. Christina couldn't sense it, but Anise, as an angel, could feel something different from those flames. However, she wasn't sure whether her current suspicions made any sense whatsoever, and even she found it hard to accept them. This also wasn't something she could afford to think about right now. The Demon King was still alive and kicking. Eugene may have undergone a transformation. Christina had been marked with a stigmata and Sienna Meridian was here as well, but that still wasn't enough to pose an unbeatable threat to the Demon King. Even in such a position, death still wasn't an imminent concern for Iris. On the other hand, what about the humans in this fight? Although the miracles summoned by divine power were staving off their deaths, there was no way their divine power could be stronger than the Demon King's own powers of immortality. Once more, Iris saw the hero who didn't really seem like one approaching her. The wizard was following behind him. Judging from the movements of the mana in the air, the wizard was already prepared to cast dozens of spells. That annoying light also continued to pour down from the sky, waiting for an opportunity to strike her down. Iris' dark power surged and the sea collapsed around her. The black seawater gathered together to form a sharp spike. Then, without her needing to make any gestures, the spike shot upwards. Since her dark power moved according to her will, all Iris required to launch an attack was to direct her killing intent at her target. The transformed spike tore a hole through the sky. From that hole, black flames ignited and spread. But dozens of separate spells shot out to restrain those black flames. Then a ray of brilliant light shot down, like the sun piercing through dark clouds, to illuminate the world. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. The moment the Demon King's attack pierced through the sky, Sienna's trap was activated. Dozens of different binding spells hidden within a spatial fold seized hold of the Demon King's body. They could only restrain the Demon King for a few moments, but in that brief opening, Eugene's sword completely erased the Demon King's body. Die! Sienna cursed as she held out her staff. The highest level of mana output she could access through her eternal hole was gathered at the tip of her staff. Then, with all her murderous intent concentrated on one spot, Sienna fired the light at the undying Demon King. Iris didn't think much of this attack. Although Sienna was leveling an amazing amount of mana at her, in the end, it was as if all Sienna had done was gather up a lot of light into a single point. The Demon King raised a barrier formed from the power of her demon eye and her own dark power to block the path of Sienna's attack. But at that moment, the massive mana underwent a change. The mana that had been gathered into a single point and shot at the Demon King scattered just before it was about to hit the barrier. The mana filled the space surrounding the Demon King, and the Devildom that was supposed to be packed full of her dark mana was now packed with so much mana that it had virtually replaced all the air around her. Freeze, Sienna thought in command as her green eyes shone. Crack. Following Sienna's order, everything her mana touched froze. The entire space surrounding the Demon King, her dark power, and even the Demon King herself in the center of it all. Even time itself was frozen in the area caught within Sienna's spell. Time and space might have been frozen, and even the Demon King's thought processes had halted, but Sienna's spell didn't stop there. Crack. The sea, free of the taint of dark power, returned to its original color. Then all of that seawater came crashing down on the Demon King. Ice spread from the center of the sea, creating a frozen plain of ice. Sienna slammed the Demon King down towards the bed of the frozen sea. The frozen waves acted as a weapon in their own right, with pieces shattering from the frozen Demon King at the slightest of impacts. Sienna! Eugene suddenly shouted. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Eugene moved as soon as his instincts warned him. But before Eugene could even stretch out his hand, Sienna had also sensed the threat and quickly cast a spell. Crack. The frozen sea split apart. A blade of darkness so sharp that it seemed like it would split the world into two was sent flying at Sienna. Fwoosh! The light that erupted between Sienna and the Demon King dulled the sharpness of the blade of darkness. Eugene swung the moonlight sword and the holy sword to push the blade of darkness off course. Gag! Sienna groaned. The blade may have been blocked, but blood still spurted from between Sienna's lips. The Demon King's figure could no longer be seen anywhere. However, this place was still within the Devildom, and all of the darkness and dark power contained within this space was still moving according to the Demon King's will. Go! Sienna shouted loudly. Iris' broken barrier was being restored. The mana from her eternal hole was also getting pushed out by the Demon King's own dark power. Upon hearing Sienna's order, Eugene didn't hesitate and immediately leaped into the still gaping sea. Although Eugene was now beneath the surface of the sea, it was no longer the sea he was familiar with. The seawater had already transformed back into its pitch-black state by the dark power. From deep within those tainted waters, Eugene spotted red eyes staring at him. The distance between them was closed in an instant. A slash of Eugene's sword left a trail of black flames, only to be blocked by Iris' dark power. The Demon King reached out to grab Eugene directly, but Eugene had no intention of allowing himself to be caught like that. With a black flash of lightning, a ray of moonlight split open the space between Eugene and the Demon King. I had this same feeling back when we first met in Kiel, the Demon King suddenly said. Plang. Her hand crushed the moonlight and proceeded to slam Eugene down into the depths of the darkness. You might be a descendant of Vermouth, but in fact you don't resemble Vermouth in the slightest, Iris observed. From above, a burst of light pierced through the darkness and opened a path to the surface. The light did not proceed to disperse and disappear but instead stayed by Eugene's side. Even in the depths of this darkness, Christina and Anise were shining their light on Eugene, and the holy sword he held in his right hand also began to light up the darkness. Iris continued, "Even though they call you the hero, you're nothing like Vermouth. Eugene Lionheart, your temperament." Eugene's modified white flame formula once again ignited with a fierce blaze. The light of destruction also flickered ominously from within the grasp of Eugene's other hand. The Demon King felt a shiver run up her spine as she watched Eugene slowly approach her. "It resembles Hamel," Iris concluded. Her infinite dark power wasn't the only thing Iris had gained from becoming the Demon King. Everything about her had been transformed to fit her new status as a Demon King. The intuition of a Demon King analyzed the temperament of the one approaching her and reminded her of the enemy from 300 years ago. Iris' eyes hardened. "Although this seems absurd, but you..." The Demon King's breathing grew heavy. Eugene's temperament wasn't the only suspicious thing that she had noticed. In her head, all the separate points were being put together. The Demon King focused on looking back more than 300 years into her own past. You really are Hamel," Iris hissed. Iris didn't receive any response from Eugene, but the Demon King was sure that Eugene was Hamel, her most hated enemy. Having become certain of this fact, what the Demon King had to do next was simple. "Eowa!" The Demon King let out a cry of sorrow. Iris sobbed as tears of blood fell from her eyes. Just like the name she had claimed, Iris was now in a state of fury. As the Demon King lost control of her own mind, the dark power that had filled her surroundings also began to run wild. "I'll kill you," the Demon King screamed as she grabbed her head with both hands. The realization that she had come to by using her newly developed intuition and the resulting fury had served as a sort of metamorphosis for the Demon King. This young Demon King, who had previously claimed the title of the Demon King of Fury for herself, had at this moment truly become the Demon King of Fury. Her demonies shone through her disheveled hair. Evil intent blended in with her murderous intent. This metamorphosis promised to be a great misfortune for the entire world. And before the world could be subjected to such ill fortune, Eugene was the one who would be the first to face this new threat. Boom. "What's going on with this bastard?" Eugene asked himself. Iris had just released a shockwave that made Eugene feel like his whole body was about to shatter into pieces. The sounds of unspoken cries were also filling his entire head. In the midst of this, Eugene felt rage and confusion. The cries told him that Iris needed to be stopped. No, that he needed to run. Or else should he try to counterattack? Eugene's battle instincts had taken hold of his consciousness. Eugene could only choose the most plausible and viable course of action. He tried to stop her. The intention was good, but the Demon King's strength was now far above Eugene's. Eugene was struck by Iris once more and sent plummeting even further into the darkness. The moment he was sent falling, the darkness coiled itself around him like a snake. Eugene didn't know if the darkness was meant to kill him by trapping him at this depth or squeezing the life out of him, but right now the darkness was making it difficult for him to even move. "It was because of you," the Demon King continued to wail. Dark power gathered onto her fingernails like claws. Screech. He barely parried her next swipe with the Holy Sword and the Moonlight Sword, but the blow was extremely heavy. Eugene's feet were pushed backward as he tried to stand his ground. "Because of you," Iris repeated. Blood spurted out from between Eugene's lips. A spike of dark power had pierced through his stomach. In response, he countered with his own flames. The Demon King wasn't the only one who had gone through a metamorphosis. Eugene's flames were still inimical to and capable of inflicting agonizing damage on the Demon King. Iris howled, "Hi, Father." Eugene couldn't understand what Iris meant by that. Oh, that's right, Eugene or Hamel had indeed played a huge part in the death of the Demon King of Fury. Could it be that she wanted revenge on her father's enemy? In that case, that certainly did apply to Eugene. And to me. Iris roared. However, those following words were truly unfair. What on earth had Eugene ever done to Iris? Was she blaming him for holding her back when Vermouth sliced open the Demon King of Fury's throat? "You fucking bitch," Eugene spat out with some blood. "You deserved everything that you got." Boom. The flames he sprayed at Iris burned fiercely as they engulfed the Demon King. Chapter 371. The Demon King of Fury 5. "They're on a different level," Ivik muttered unconsciously as he stood atop the Formery's mast. He had already said the same thing a few times now, and he thought it even more often than he had voiced it. The main ship of the Slad mercenary company, the Formery, was sticking close to the Laversia's rear. Currently, the priests were standing in a circle on the ship's deck, focusing their divine power on Christina, while the paladins, including Paladin Adel, were protecting the priests. But their numbers alone weren't enough to guarantee the priests' protection. Even a child would know how important the role of a priest was in a battle against a demon king and the demon folk who served them. Dozens of elite Slad mercenaries had remained on the Formery to aid in protecting the priests while all the other troops had gathered on the Laversia. The head of the mercenary company, Ivik, was staying on the Formery. While he, as someone who was called the Mercenary King, might have the corresponding confidence in his close combat abilities, he had even more confidence when it came to using his bow to snipe from a distance. Because he had taken such a high position, Ivik could watch the entire battle unfolding in front of him. What lay ahead, taking place over and below the sea, the battle being fought in the true center of the Devildom, was truly on a different level. Ivik was someone who had also possessed overflowing confidence in his own skills. He had felt that only because he wasn't actually a knight, the name Ivik Slad was not mentioned when discussing who the greatest knight on the continent was. After all, wasn't that how things usually went? Most people saw mercenaries as being weaker than knights. However, the battle taking place within the Devildom up ahead was causing all of the confidence that Ivik had once possessed to disappear. Ivik had come here because he wanted his career to be recorded as a legend worthy of his title as the Mercenary King. Even now, he didn't have any intention of fleeing. However, Ivik did feel a slight regret. To think that I would feel jealousy at this age. But it's only natural to feel so reluctant after being shown what your place truly is, Ivik sighed. This applied even more so when the one who had shown Ivik how inferior he truly was much younger than him. With a wry smile, Ivik knocked an arrow onto his bowstring. Eugene Lionheart and the Demon King were the ones fighting in the Devildom up ahead. Even though he should be focused on protecting the saint and the priests, Ivik kept thinking of how that young man was successfully facing a Demon King in head-on combat. If it were him, would Ivik have been able to do so? There was no way. He would have already died and been buried at sea. Ivik was able to calmly accept this conclusion. Even the combined power of the wise Sienna, Eugene Lionheart and Christina Rogerus wasn't enough to overwhelm the Demon King. However, they were still able to maintain enough of a balance in the fight that they could be said to be on equal footing with the Demon King. And that alone was already a surprise. However, the Demon King just refuses to die, Ivik thought bitterly. The Demon King had already been killed more than 10 times now. Having died so many times, she should at least have been weakened, but instead, with each death, the Demon King actually seemed to be growing stronger. No, Ivik realized. She's not getting stronger. She's getting more familiar with her powers. As a Demon King who hadn't been born all that long ago, Iris still wasn't familiar with the strength she now possessed. Because Ivik could now see this for himself, he realized why Eugene had been so stubborn in insisting that they needed to attack her now. At this moment, the Demon King was at her weakest. Although she might be getting more used to her new strength as they fought, she still wasn't at her strongest state. That was why they had to kill her today. Tisk. Ivik clicked his tongue as he loosed the bowstring. The arrow flew out soundlessly and split into dozens of pieces before it reached its targets. Bum. These dozens of arrow shards poured down onto the deck of the Laversia like raindrops. The battle wasn't just taking place within the center of Iris Devildom. Ahead of the Formery on board the Laversia, a battle had also broken out. The Dark Elves who served the Demon King were pushing back against the Laversia's forces with their bodies that had been infused with dark power. Ordis had remained with the reserve fleet in order to deal with the pirates. So, the one currently controlling the flow of the battle aboard the Laversia was Carmen Lionheart. More than 10 Dark Elves had already been killed by her 2 fists. Apart from Carmen, several other elite members of the subjugation force were also dealing with the Dark Elves. Ivik had also been sniping at them whenever he saw an opening. The battle was tense. Although the Dark Elves possessed exceptional individual strength, they all attacked as if they didn't even know what pain was and weren't afraid of death. No, could these really still be called Dark Elves? Ivik struggled to answer this question even as he kept pulling on his bowstring. Their pitch-black skin, their long, pointed ears and their crimson eyes. Although they had retained these traits from their appearance as Dark Elves, those were the only things that remained. Elves were a race that could be described as the epitome of beauty. Those elves who were corrupted by dark power transformed into dark elves. But even though they may have been corrupted, they still retained the same beauty they had when they were elves. But the dark elves currently rampaging aboard the Laversia retained none of that beauty. They had sharp, protruding and misshapen fangs, and their limbs were bulging with grotesque musculature. Some severe cases had fur the same color as their hair, others had protruding snouts like beasts, and a few others had even grown as large as giants. In Ivic's judgment, they could no longer be called dark elves. This was because even if their long ears, red eyes and pitch-black skin may have remained, they had gained much more pronounced characteristics that had completely overwritten their former identities as dark elves. They might have once been elves and dark elves, but now they were just monsters. Ivic snorted. Indeed, monsters are the best way to describe them. However, Ivic felt that the saint currently standing on top of Laversia's figurehead might even be more of a monster than the dark elves. Still, she wasn't fighting against the Demon King while flying high in the sky like Sienna or Eugene. Having begun this battle in her role as the saint, Christina had kept performing her duty without any changes. On top of the figurehead, the saint had been standing there with her wings outspread, without stepping away from it the moment the battle had started. Even when more than 100 dark elves leaped over from the Demon King's ship, Christina hadn't taken even a single step backward. As the dark elves chomped their fangs and slashed their claws at her in an attempt to hurt the saint, Christina hadn't even turned her head to look at them. The eyes of the saint were solely fixed on Eugene, Sienna, and the Demon King. She was protected by a barrier, and at times when one of the dark elves' hands or feet managed to get past that barrier, the iron ball at the end of her flail swung into movement. But most dark elves were shot through by Ivic's arrows or were blocked by Carmen and the others before that could happen. Although Christina might be receiving their protection, her saintly appearance of refusing to turn her gaze or even show any sign of intimidation filled her defenders with admiration for her. It wasn't just the saint either. Along with the hero and the archwizard, they all showed such impressive performances that those watching couldn't help but worship them. While in the midst of shooting hundreds of arrows, Ivic still had the freedom to consider these thoughts. And wasn't that quite the surprise? The battle was still tense, but that was the case for most battles. The battle was arduous, but that was how all battles were. People were getting hurt and dying, as was only natural on a battlefield like this. To a mercenary like Ivic, this sort of battlefield even appeared ordinary and routine. For this to be a battlefield on which they were fighting against a demon king. To be honest, something didn't feel quite right. The reason for that might be the three heroes at the forefront were suppressing any fear of the Demon King by showing such an admirable display of heroics. Trust that those heroes could face the Demon King head-on and defeat her made everyone who fought on this battlefield believe there was hope for victory. After all, look at them now. Wasn't their light brightening up the dark skies and red seas? But then it all collapsed. The hope that was slowly becoming stronger shattered before it could even be voiced out loud. The dark power erupting from the split-open sea once again dyed the world pitch black. Cock-a-cock-a-cock-ick. There was a sound like thousands of crows cawing together. This massive eruption of noise transformed the battlefield. The saint's blessing of protection was shaken to its core, and the people fighting aboard the Laversia and the Formery all stumbled and fell. The loud noise even managed to reach the reserve fleet. More than 10 of the ships in the rear were instantly capsized. A few ships were even torn into pieces as if they had been struck by artillery fire. The monsters also paused in their fighting. Those terrible beings turned their soulless gazes to look up at the dark power surging into the skies. At the center of the swirling dark power stood the Demon King. As streaks of dark red, bloody tears fell from her eyes, the Demon King was wrenching on her own hair. But she wasn't able to calm the chaos in her head, preventing her from returning to her previous state. No, the Demon King didn't even have any intention of calming her inner chaos in the first place. This chaos was who she was at her very essence, a fury that could never be forgotten. Aeawa! The Demon King let out a roar as she continued to clutch her head. She spared a glance at the scenery below and caught sight of her many dead subordinates, those dark elves whom Iris had always considered her family. Most of them were dark elves with whom the Demon King had built up a bond over the past 300 years. You dare, you dare, you dare. Iris screamed. All these family members were dead. So many family members who should have been able to celebrate her glory together with her had died here like this. This sight made the Demon King recall the memories inherited from her father. A city soaked in blood. A mountain of corpses. A man standing on top of that mountain, giving off the stench of blood. Her father had been routed from this land. He hadn't been able to save his children. He couldn't even avenge his children's deaths. She respected and loved her father, but that was his biggest mistake. It won't happen, not to me, Iris vowed. Fate tends to repeat itself. Those were the words that the Demon King of Incarceration has said in idle thought. But this Demon King refused to agree with that tendency. Her existence was both proof of her father's promise and also proof of his failure. Her father had been defeated in this land a long time ago and forced to flee while abandoning his own family. Then, when everything was over, he had returned here once more and made a promise with the Demon King of Incarceration. If her father hadn't been defeated. Not to me, Iris repeated herself. She was enraged by the death of her dark elves. This rage didn't break the Demon King's spirit, nor did it weaken her resolve. Instead, it drew out even further depths of murderous intent and raging fury from her. Even if it was just to prove that fate wouldn't repeat itself and also to hear the whole truth from the Demon King of Incarceration, the Demon King had to win this battle and turn this battlefield into her own territory. Only then would she be able to honor the souls of her deceased family members. Fush. Eugene soared out of the swirling sea. His ashen hair was soaked in blood, and his left arm appeared to have been broken. However, even with his vision dyed red, Eugene was able to glare straight at the Demon King. He still couldn't understand what this crazy bitch was saying, but he wondered if there was even a point in trying to understand her. "Sir Eugene," Christina called out after gasping at his miserable appearance. Eugene shone with light as Christina attempted to perform a miracle on him, only for the light to be blocked by a strong barrier of dark power. Clang. Eugene's whole body had been wrapped in enough dark power to negate any miracles performed on him. But the empty sword that was still burning with black flames pushed back the dark power. Bam bam bam. The strengthened spell managed to scatter the dark power surrounding him. Having arrived soon after he did, Sienna glanced at Eugene, her face bloodless and pale. The same was true for Eugene's face as well as Christina's, who had yet to even turn her head to look at Sienna. This look of fatigue wasn't all that unusual. That was just how battles against a Demon King were. The black, burning wings of prominence fluttered as Eugene showed the same extreme acceleration that he displayed earlier. The Demon King spread her arms wide as she prepared to meet the lightning bolt tearing its way through her devildom. Eugene felt a strong sense of impending doom, but he didn't allow himself to show any fear. He trusted Christina, Anise, and Sienna. And they also managed to live up to Eugene's trust wonderfully. The inescapable sense of impending doom was broken by a spell and then thoroughly erased through a miracle. Meanwhile, all of Eugene's power was poured into the holy sword. The Demon King's body shattered. But the same was true for the arm that Eugene had used to swing the holy sword. His flesh and muscles were torn and his bones were broken. Then time seemed to be rewound. Eugene's accelerated thought processes made everything appear to happen in slow motion. His broken bones were stuck back together, blood vessels, nerves and muscles were reconnected, and finally his flesh covered everything back up. If only the Moonlight Sword, Eugene thought regretfully. The Moonlight Sword, which had always shown unsurpassable strength in his battles so far, was powerless at this moment. Its full power, which had been crippled to less than half of what it had at its height, was inferior compared to the damage output of the Holy Sword when combined with Eugene's mana. He couldn't allow this to continue. Eugene intensely desired to wield the full power of the Moonlight Sword. In order to emit its rays of moonlight, this damned sword would greedily absorb all of Eugene's mana, but the resulting moonlight refused to combine with his own mana. This was the real reason why the Moonlight Sword was currently weaker than the Holy Sword, not just because he had yet to collect all of its fragments. This was all because Eugene himself had grown far too strong. The reason for the Holy Sword's strength wasn't just from its divine power. It was also because Eugene's increased strength had further amplified the sword's own power. By using the empty sword technique, which further explosively amplified its power, the Holy Sword could even surpass the current Moonlight Sword. Even though you greedily swallow up all of my strength, you still refuse to combine with me? Eugene complained in his head. Don't bullshit me. Instead of glowing gold, Eugene's bloodshot eyes shone with a red light. The grip of his fingers, which was already so strong that it seemed like his bones were about to shatter, tightened even further around the hilt of the moonlight sword. The back of his hand, which was bulging with blood vessels, began to tremble. The knuckles of his fingers clenched even tighter. Without the slightest exaggeration, Eugene's left hand actually began to crush the hilt of the moonlight sword. For a moment the moonlight flickered away. Then the light of the moonlight reappeared. The mana that Eugene was pouring into the shattered hilt was infused into each and every fragment of the moonlight sword. The mana pouring out from the contorted stars of Eugene's white flame formula was not white but a dark black so deep that it looked as if it could suck you in. If it were a dark night, the silvery light that was shining in the midst of the flames of mana pouring into the blade would genuinely look like rays of moonlight. The pale ashen moonlight intensified. Eugene's mana and the moonlight were synchronizing. At that moment Eugene suddenly began to lose hold of his consciousness. Today Eugene had proved himself to be different from his memories of Vermouth. By transforming the white flame formula, he had surpassed all of his previous limits, but Eugene was undergoing yet another transformation. At a time like this, Eugene should have been feeling a great sense of elation. He should be feeling fulfilled at having finally reached his goal of surpassing Vermouth. However, strangely enough, he currently didn't have any such thoughts. This was because the power that Eugene held in his left hand, the moonlight that was shining out into this pitch-black world, was so ominous that everyone on the battlefield could sense it. The moonlight sword? Sienna thought in puzzlement. Sienna was also well acquainted with the moonlight sword. Even if she used both hands, Sienna wouldn't be able to count the number of times she had been able to survive because of the moonlight sword. That silvery light was familiar to her. But even though that ray of moonlight had been a terrible nightmare for their enemies, that didn't mean it was a source of hope for their friends. This was because it had always seemed exceptionally ominous. Whenever Vermouth had swung the moonlight sword, that moonlight had managed to outshine even Vermouth's own brilliant flames. At those times, it had been difficult for any of his allies, be it Sienna, Moulin, Anise or even Hamel, to get close to Vermouth. In the case of the moonlight sword that Eugene was currently holding, the moonlight that emanated from the half-shattered blade, in terms of ominousness, was even worse than when Vermouth had wielded the moonlight sword. The spells responsible for defending Eugene and opening up a path for him were destroyed the moment that the moonlight touched them. The miracles cast by Christina and Anise to protect Eugene were also swept away by the moonlight and dissipated. Even the holy sword that Eugene was holding in his right hand wasn't an exception to this. The moonlight emitted by the moonlight sword was even more egotistical than the light of the god of light. However, this silvery light was strong enough to justify doing so. As the wavering moonlight grew to engulf Eugene's hand, the Demon King's dark power in his vicinity was easily erased. The light grew so bright that Eugene couldn't clearly see what was in front of him. Then this moonlight exploded.